I think that our little comments application is now looking pretty good, so we're going to start to move on to our next big topic. Now, to introduce this topic, I want to remind you about something that we spoke about long ago. Towards the beginning of this course, we discussed what a component was, and I had said that a component is a function or a class, and that we use these to produce HTML to show the user, and we also handle feedback from the user. Now at this point, we've kind of only done half of the boxes on here. We've really only spoken about what a functional component is, and we've really only seen how to produce some HTML to show the user, but not handle any feedback or updates or anything like that. So in this section, we're going to start to change that. We're going to start to discuss class-based components and how we can use them to somehow manage feedback from the user or from other systems inside of our program and update how our components are rendering content on the screen based on some new information. All right, so I want to first give you a quick overview on the differences between functional components and class-based components. One of the more challenging things to do when you are a beginner to the world of React is to decide whether to use a class-based component or a functional one. It's a somewhat straightforward thing to decide, but when you're first getting started, it can be kind of hard to figure out which one to go with. So I want to try to give you some solid rules of thumb that you can use. We're going to say that we want to use functional components anytime that we are trying to show simple content to the user without a lot of logic behind it. Now, everything that we've done so far in this course, like the approval card and this app and the comment detail, these are all examples of simple components that just create some amount of JSX and immediately return it. This JSX might refer to some props that we've passed into the component, but besides that, there's not a lot of complicated logic going on. So we can just create our JSX, return it, and that's it. If you feel like you are going to be creating a component that has exactly that goal in mind, just creating some simple content, you're going to want to go with a functional component. Now the other side of that coin, or the other type of component, class-based component, we're basically going to say, or I'm going to kind of cheap out here, I'm going to take an easy out. I'm going to essentially tell you, if you're not creating simple content, you probably want to use a class-based component. So if you have any complex logic, if you have anything that needs to respond to user input, if you have anything that needs to make network requests, anything in that regard, chances are you're going to want to make a class-based component instead. Now, I gotta be honest with you, I personally really enjoy working with class-based components, but there are many engineers out there who would absolutely disagree with me. The community around React is kind of split on this topic. Some people say, oh yeah, try to use as many functional components as you possibly can. Other people say, yeah, use class-based components. Now, I want to highlight some of the pros and cons of either approach. Like I said, I am someone who kind of prefers class-based components, but I'm going to do my best to tell you why you might choose to use one over the other. Okay, so benefits of class-based component. Now, the first one on here is, in my opinion, one of the biggest reasons to use class-based components. With a class-based component, we get easier, we have an easier time organizing our code in general. Not always, but usually organizing your code is a little bit more straightforward. For me personally, when I look at a functional component, if there ends up being a decent amount of logic in here, and maybe even a helper function or two, like maybe a helper function right here, and maybe we've got another one underneath it with some amount of code inside there, when I open up this file, for me personally, it can be rather challenging to immediately take a glance and figure out what's going on inside of here. However, with a class-based component, this is totally subjective. I believe that they are a little bit easier to read as an engineer. Now, that one is totally subjective, so I'm not going to talk that much more about it. But some of the other much more clear benefits of class-based components is that they can use the state system in React, which is something that we have not yet discussed. Right now, we can essentially just understand that the state system is something that we use to make it easier to handle user input and update our application in how it looks. Class-based components also have the benefit of understanding lifecycle events. And that's another thing we haven't discussed yet. We're going to discuss both these things very quickly, but we don't quite know them yet. So for right now, you can basically just understand that a lifecycle event just means that it's easier to do some tasks when our application first starts up than if we were using a functional component. Okay, so that's kind of a short spiel on some of the benefits of using class-based components, but to be honest with you, understanding the difference between these two things is just about impossible until you see very good examples of both of them. So with that in mind, let's take a pause right here. When we come back to the next section, we're going to start talking about an app that we're going to build to understand some of the key core differences between functional components and class-based components. So quick pause, and I'll see you in just a minute.